Hello, and welcome to today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent. I'm Dakota Palicki. COVID-19 has changed the face of education and training in a matter of weeks. Schools have moved to online learning, commencement ceremonies have been postponed, and lingering questions about what the fall term might look like are on the minds of students, families, and education professionals. There's a lot of high-quality news coverage that is helping to answer these questions. And instead of replicating the good work of these reporters, we decided to focus today's show on three people who have a role to play in meeting students' needs. Today, you will hear from Dr. Harrison Keller, the Commissioner of Higher Education in Texas, about the challenges and opportunities his state faces. We will also hear from Chancellor Juan Salgado, who leads the City Colleges of Chicago. As Chancellor, he and his team move quickly to meet the needs of all 70,000 students in their 7-college system. But before we talk to these system leaders, we start today's episode by hearing directly from a high school counselor. Kathy Longstreet and her team at Hastings High School in Michigan have been finding ways to support their senior class, whose post-secondary plans are now upended as they face decisions of whether to continue their education by going to college or to stay home and enter the workforce. I had a chance to catch up with Kathy between her virtual advising sessions with students and families. Let's listen in.
I am a high school counselor at a rural high school in Southwest Michigan called Hastings High School. We serve just under 900 students through both our traditional school and our virtual program.
So I'm not exactly sure where Hastings is in Michigan. Is this where you give me the Michigan Mitt?
Okay, yes. So here's the Michigan Mitt, and Hastings is about right over here.
Oh, okay.
We are about 45 minutes from Lansing, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Holland, or Grand Rapids. So pretty accessible to many areas, but definitely small town area for our community.
And so, you said you're a counselor, 900 students, on a typical non-COVID-19 day. What do you do on a daily basis?
Okay, well, first off, I don't think any school counselor can say a day is typical, but no matter whether we're in this scenario or not, it can be a range of anything from working with students who are academically struggling, some mental health, maybe some crisis work, but a lot of college and career work. That is one of the things that I do more than anything here, which can cover the academic advising or scheduling or post-secondary planning.
I got to imagine a lot of that has changed in the way it looks now that you're mainly dealing with students virtually, I suppose.
Yes, it's been pretty challenging for our district. We are not a district where students have their own technology that's given by the school. We can't really guarantee that every student has the technology and Wi-Fi necessary for their work at home. So the whole school, actually the whole district, we're trying to do whatever we can, giving things in a paper form that students can pick up versus doing things virtually.
You said you have about 900 students. How many of those are seniors about to graduate and transition on to whatever their next post-secondary plan is?
We have about 185 seniors. This is the first year, by the way, we've had 3 counselors, which I've been extremely grateful about. The first one is grant funded, so she does mental health works primarily. But the other counselor and myself pretty much share all the other duties, but she does a lot of the college and career with me. She's brand new, so she'd kind of dove right in this year and went right into the deep end with me with working with seniors, but she does share the load of helping these students throughout the year and of course right now as well.
So what does it look like, to try to support a senior right now who's, about to go into post-secondary through either, these phone calls, and especially coordinating between you and another colleague?
Usually it's a lot of questions on my end right now, just because information and circumstances are changing almost daily, that I have to have very different conversations than I probably even had with them a month and a half ago. And reminding you again that this is a rural district, that a lot of our students, this when COVID happened and our school canceled, was really a time of the year that we spend a lot more time again with our seniors, because many of them are still on the fence of what they're going to do, whether that's college or directly into the workforce. So to be absent during that time, I think has been a real struggle. So now it's kind of reframing and finding out what is important to them, what do they really want to do and how can we help them get there? It's almost as if it's not we're starting over again, but we're looking at all the options again, considering everything.
Mm. You said some circumstances are changing for students.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure that many counselors can share similar stories, but I have a student I just worked with last week who is college bound. Everything was all set. Of course, their family income has changed dramatically. Even the student himself, now his time is spent doing schoolwork, but really also trying to work. He works in a grocery store as much as he possibly can to help support his family. So then looking at what part of his college costs that his family was going to put in is really not an option any longer. So then it's talking about helping him talk with the college that he'd like to go to, or does he take a year and earn more money? I mean, there's many more factors to consider now than there used to be.
How is he feeling? I mean, like, obviously there's the logistics of like, okay, how am I going to pay for college? How am I going to prepare and get these forms completed? All the logistics that we know are fairly, complicated to begin with in the best of circumstances. But I have to imagine this is adding an emotional element to this as well.
Yes. Well, first thing I asked him, I always ask students, like, how's school going? Whatever the school means. And I'm really proud of our district. They've given our students a lot of grace in that their grading is based on when we stopped school. And if they would like to improve that grade, they can continue their work and their learning to be able to do that. But it does give them that ability. If they have other responsibilities, they don't have to be worried, solely focused on that. For him, he was one of the first students I had that told me he was actually really grateful to be home because he could spend 40 hours a week working to support his family rather than having to worry about a myriad of other things while he's at school. So his focus is primarily on what he can do for his family to support them financially right now, as well as how can we get things straightened out for college so he can continue on that pathway. So very, very different conversation than what he and I had even a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fascinating. I mean, you see how many students typically, you think about a prototypical, senior year, and you're focused on just finishing up and all the tapestry that comes along with graduating and all the end of the year, and then moving into kind of a college environment. But, I'm sure there are many students that are finding themselves in the same position as the particular student you're talking about. I guess I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you think that's going to shift the way that students approach going to post-secondary? If more students are realizing that they might, be needed to support their family at home, and maybe if I put off college a little bit, are you having any of those conversations with students who are now? I know it's still early on, but unemployment continues to rise. Families are clearly feeling the pinch. Do you feel, are you concerned about students not taking the step directly after senior year into post-secondary to stay home, support their family?
Yes. And to be fair, in my environment here, we have almost half the building are first generation college students. So that's a concern every year. Every year we get that phenomenon you may have heard that's called summer melt that we worry about. Students commit by the end of the school year, but then something happens over the summer where they don't really end up where they said they were going to end up. But right now that is even a bigger issue. Just in the example I just gave, I mean, they are feeling such a pull to support and help this family that's helped them for so long that they are unsure about that ability to move forward. And also on top of that is hearing how things could be virtual. And then they wonder, well, if it's virtual, why should I go away when I could be working from home and still being there to support my family? So that is a very real conversation. And that's where it gets into that individual talk with each student about what do they want, what's important to them right now, but also remembering what's still important that can really benefit their family overall as well by going to college. So that is a huge concern right now. I have a feeling that many more are going to step back than do normally in the summer, just to, number one, wait to see what happens with COVID-19. The other is to see if they can help stabilize their family again. And then I'm sure their families, some of the families, it's very polarizing. I have some families that want those students home with them to be safe. And I understand that as a parent. I completely understand that. But I also have families that feel like their students were robbed of their, like you mentioned, their senior experiences, and they want them to be able to go on to that next level to start their life.
So shifting a little bit, I'm curious, as to whether or not you're getting the kind of information and partnership and connectivity from the post-secondary partners that you've talked about. It's one thing to have these kind of advising conversations with the whole family, but I think about my days working in the school district, and sure, we got FAFSA completion complete, but then over half my students get flagged for verification, and and that's already a complex kind of process. So, are you getting the kind of support that you need from colleges and universities and trade schools or other post-secondary providers?
If I've asked, yes. I feel like everybody is trying to figure out what the fall is going to look like. And so a lot of my information comes from reading articles and data. But when I'm supporting a student and I reach out, there's no change to that. There might be a little bit different time frame just because not everybody is probably sitting in their office, but it still is that same, how can we help and what can we do?
What are some of the uncertainties that you still feel that colleges and other post-secondary providers have to figure out?
Let's see, cost, when will school start? Where will school be? I mean, I personally, in my own family, I have a junior in college. So his senior year next year, he's home right now doing his work remotely. So, and he's an engineer. So physics labs don't always translate well online. So I can imagine there's many scenarios that way. But I think I believe colleges know they have to start making those decisions. But how do you make those decisions in an ever-changing environment? So for me, when I'm talking to students, I'm just encouraging them to stay in contact with their schools, to go through their virtual events, which pretty much all of them have gone to now, to keep going forward in the process, and then maybe that decision will be made later than it normally is. A lot of schools still have a May 1 deposit date, but virtually every school that I've worked with a student has told me that if something changes or a decision needs to be made differently, they will give that back. So students can at least feel like they can move forward and continue as if that's the plan, and then we make decisions when we know more.
So I guess, we know that there's a lot of uncertainty, as you just kind of laid out. What do you think needs to happen? I mean, if you were on the other side of the equation, you're out of college, what needs to happen to best support students who are going to come in the fall?
Students are going to need even more support. I think that there's got to be something. I've seen some scenarios where schools have talked about having just the freshmen on campus and keeping the older students home. Or I just think it's so important for freshman year for those students to get on campus if that's where they're going to be. I think they need to start strong and with full support from that college in order to get the ball rolling in that next level. So I feel like in absence of that, we are going to have many more students that are not going to start. They're not going to persist. There's too many variables there that aren't going to be controllable. So I think that's got to be the biggest thing, is how can we minimally get these students on campus so they can start having that experience and have that support, that real live support when they're there. I just feel there's so much that students learn in college besides the academics and that they learn for life that they're going to miss out on. You can't replicate everything virtually, so they're not going to be able to have that experience that they're so needed to prepare them for after those 4 years. So that's the part that I'm really hoping that can be straightened out.
So what has been, encouraging to you? I mean, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty, things we have to clear up, but, I got to believe, still having this kind of close contact to students like you've been having has provided some encouragement, maybe even some funny moments. What has gotten your hope up?
I think the biggest thing has been the clarity. When I speak to the seniors, I can't say that they've matured over 2 months, but some of them have matured over 2 months. I don't know if putting themselves in a situation like this has really made them prioritize things in their life, but I cannot believe the level of maturity when I speak to them. And how they've been thinking. Maybe it's more time that they're contemplating what's going on in their life and what they want to do, because there's all these other things that are absent from their life. But that has been really surprising to me. When I talk to a student and they talk to me about things that they're doing to take care of themselves, like they go out and they walk. I had a student that told me how she was going kayaking and was talking about how peaceful it was, which when we don't have those moments to be able to do that, we don't appreciate that. So that's been really cool to experience through them and hear from them. But then also just to hear even sometimes students who have not been completely academically clued in when we're working at school that are showing up for our packet pickups and wanting, what can I do? What else can I do to learn? Or how can you help me to get this assignment finished? That's always what's so surprising. But in a way, I guess it's also not surprising, because for so many students, school was more than academics. It was a part of their life that was routine, that was stable, that was safe. And for them to not have that is pretty scary. So I think that that's been really, really important for them through this time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you, and best of luck. I know you have a lot of students to serve. And so I thank you for everything that you're doing for those students and for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me to join you. I think this is a really important topic, and I'm really happy that you're taking some time to discuss it and share it out.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back. A lot of mainstream media coverage has been focused on state flagship and Ivy League institutions. What's being overlooked is the tremendous impact the pandemic is having on community college systems. Responsible for a wide-ranging mission, including providing high-touch student services, community colleges have had to get creative and meet the needs of their current students. My next guest leads one of these large community college systems and joins me to talk through what's working well and what we need to do to prepare for recovery.
How you doing, Dakota? Thanks for the invitation. Yes, I'm, again, Juan Salgado, Chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago. Our system are 7 independently accredited colleges that work together under one unified district. And we have over 70,000 students in our system.
Thank you. I'm really appreciative of your time today. I know you're quite busy responding to all the needs that are happening right now. And I was hoping you can give us a sense of what the City Colleges of Chicago have been doing to respond to COVID-19.
So obviously, the most important thing we can do to respond to COVID-19 is to ensure the safety of our campuses, our students, our faculty and staff, and our communities in general. As you can imagine, we had to, like many places, shift classes online. We did that in a very short period of time, 1 week, for 30,000 credit students. That has been the case since March 23rd. We went from 10% of credit class sections being taught fully online to 92% of credit classes sections taught fully online. Our faculty got very creative and worked very hard, as did our staff and our entire administration. It was very much a team effort. We're not just doing this in the credit area. On April 13th, we launched distance adult education courses. And so, again, very proud of the teamwork that we've had at City Colleges. We've learned a lot about what we're capable to do when we're challenged in a moment like this. this. And also very proud of our students. Our students have generally persisted through this. They've adjusted. They've continued to stay in communication and continued on with their educations. That's the most important thing. We've lost a lot of normalcy in our lives, but we were able to deliver to our students the normalcy that comes with continuing their education, continuing on with their careers, and also the attachment, the important attachment that being linked up, being part of a community college system like ours brings a lot of services and supports and community at a moment when you want to have community, albeit you can't have it face to face, but we can do it virtually. And that provides a great deal of emotional support for our students as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great place for us to pick up on. I mean, certainly it's quite a feat to move from 10% of online courses to upward, over 90%. That's very incredible, especially done so quickly over a single week. But as you mentioned, their community colleges are well known for providing a lot of high touch services to their students to make sure students are staying on a pathway towards a credential or achieving whatever objective it is that they're taking classes for. What have you seen kind of some of the challenges as well as some things that you're proud of as you and your team have moved from some of these high touch in-person services to a more virtual environment?
Well, the first thing that you have to do, obviously, is make sure that all of your students have the laptops and connectivity to be able to participate, right? And so in the case of our students, not all of them had that. They relied on the campus itself to be able to utilize computer labs and sign on to the internet because, quite frankly, they couldn't afford it. They could barely afford the cost of their education. And so we had to move quickly. We greatly expanded our loaner laptop program. We've got hotspots that have been delivered to our students. I can tell you right now, there's not a single student at City College of Chicago that needs a laptop or needs a hotspot that has not had one delivered to them in order to continue on their education. But it's not just about the coursework, as you said. It really is so much about the services, the student services that we provided. And so, quite frankly, the heavier lift during that week that we were on pause was the student services. The platform that we have, the learning management platform, lent itself for faculty to jump on very easily. Because they had become accustomed to it and could just adapt curriculum and content. In the case of student services, we had to build that from scratch. We had to get people to use the learning platforms and technology in different ways. But I will tell you, right now, actually, right when we opened anew on March 23rd, we had admissions, advising, library, tutoring, financial aid, registrar, the business office, veteran services, transfer services, wellness center, information technology, help desk, disability access center, a call center. I mean, look, we had every service back up and running, available for students in an online format. And what happened is the students themselves, for instance, student government, was able to quickly also operate and start to have, gatherings, right? A little different than before, but, they got a DJ to play some music and, people got on Zoom and they had a social gathering in their homes. And things like that are enabled by the fact that student services, were able to, operate remotely and find a normalcy quote unquote normalcy, right, within this environment. So, again, we're very proud of those efforts. And I want to raise them up because oftentimes, when we think about the move to remote, people are thinking about instruction, right? And they're thinking about online instruction. And we all know that to serve students well, the student services are a critical component.
Absolutely. I think that's, one of the things that some folks are getting concerned about as we look ahead into, recovery. And I know, even right now, as we're recording this right before, I was glancing at an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about some states that have already announced some pretty massive budget cuts to higher education institutions in preparation for decreased state revenue. To your point, we know that institutions, particularly community colleges, provide so much more than just your academic instructional mission. And sometimes it's those extra services, those really important critical student services that get lost when, budget cuts are necessary. As you look to the future, what concerns you the most about continuing to operate a really high quality environment for your students in a future where a budget cut might be necessary or coming from the state?
Well, obviously, we're going to monitor the resources coming in from the state, but we're also going to do everything that we can to ensure that we preserve the services that we provide for our students, right? And so that's not an easy task, but this is a moment where we're just going to have to dig in and try to find ways to figure it out. I can tell you, at city colleges, I don't have plans for massive layoffs here. Okay. I think there's a way to move forward. That does not mean that, we don't have to make adjustments, right? Adjustments in these time periods are always necessary, right? And always challenging and hard, right? Nonetheless, we are trying to make the adjustments that we can that will allow us to preserve the services that we provide today. Because as you pointed out, they are just so critical to our students, well-being. And that's what we're focused on right now. Persistence is the most important here, okay? So, we've also been raising private philanthropic dollars to ensure that we're in a position to support our students more. Before this federal stimulus dollars that were provided, we raised nearly $800,000 to provide students with direct student support. Already this week we've executed it, and over $225,000 have been sent to students in $500 increments. Next week, another $225,000 will be sent to students in increments to just help them with life needs. We're raising dollars to ensure that we can help with tuition needs. All of these things are of critical importance. And of course, we're waiting for the federal government to actually approve our plan and actually send us the resources for the federal stimulus. That has not happened for us or for a wide range of institutions to date.
Yeah, I am really encouraged to hear you, and I'm sure other people are really encouraged to hear you say that persistence is really critical and is on your mind, because I think there's a lot of other higher leaders right now that are thinking enrollment is the most critical element of their operation as they look ahead. I think that's just it's encouraging to hear you talk a little bit about a focus on persistence. As you look into enrollment, there's a lot of speculation out there right now about whether or not, this next phase, usually college enrollment is countercyclical, and whether or not that trend would continue to follow. From your perspective, are you anticipating, what kind of trends are you anticipating when it comes to enrollment, particularly within your own city colleges, but also just community colleges more broadly?
It's really hard to say. This is a very unique moment where we don't have a moment, quite like this one to go back and compare it to, right? Where you have not just the unemployment and the sort of lack of opportunity that might drive people to come get an education, but then you also have the safety issues and safety concerns that students and families may have in this coming year. And then you have, caring for other siblings and things of that nature, or caring for folks that are ill in their homes. I mean, there's a confluence of things that are occurring right now that I think make it very difficult. But I think institutions like ours, especially community colleges, need to be reaching out to make sure that students understand that a delay in their career plans, right, is, if they can avoid it, they should avoid it. When the economy rebounds, it will rebound to the benefit of those that have an education and a skill, okay? And if you can stay on that path, right? If you're a high schooler, it's persistent because you're persisting from high school into post-secondary education. If you're somebody out of work right now, this is the important time because the economy is going to shift tremendously. And no matter what you choose to study in general, having more education, having more skill is going to help you in that regard. So, but it's also hard because it's harder for you to choose right now with these shifts in economy to say, well, where are the jobs going to be, right? And, it's a little harder for us to say that, right now, at least in the near term. I believe, places, obviously, healthcare and education, and transportation and distribution and logistics. There's several sectors that are going to continue, tech obviously, continue to grow and expand. But there may be other sectors that, at least in the short term, there are serious question marks about. So, students should be seeing advisors, but we know that education, regardless of what you study, ends up paying off in some way down the road. And so, our message is don't forego the opportunity right now. And, in our case, we have an extremely affordable rate, that's, at the reach of most students, and we're raising money for those students that may not be able to reach even that far.
So, you mentioned a couple of sectors certainly that will might have some continued growth, and of course have called attention to the uncertainty of knowing, what jobs will be available, what jobs are going to be needed. But we also know that community colleges like yours play a really critical role in making sure the workforce of a region is prepared to meet the kind of talent demands. As you're looking, at the kind of scale, the potential scale of the amount of adults that need to re-enter some kind of education experience to skill up or earn a new credential. Are there particular policies and practices that you're looking at from an institutional level to make the transition of learning? And part of me a little bit more effective. Part of me is thinking about things like recognition of learning that, validates and recognizes the learning that someone might have experienced in an employer or in a trade, program that was taught outside of a traditional higher education institution onto an expedited credit pathway towards an associate's degree or towards an additional credential. What are you thinking about in terms of pivoting institutional policy and practice to make the transition for people who need to reskill a little bit smoother?
Yeah. So this is obviously a moment at which, our provost and our faculty, need to be in that, problem solving mode, and working department by department and issue by issue. This is not generalizable, okay? That's the challenge, right? I can't tell you, this is the general direction that will solve for all these challenges. There is none. What it is it's the continued, we have centers of excellence at City Colleges of Chicago. That is, each college is a comprehensive college with full transfer opportunities, with a full set of course offerings. But we've asked each of the colleges to specialize in a certain sector so that they become subject matter experts in that sector. So they can dig deeper into the industry credentials and requirements, and so they can problem solve for these kinds of challenges and draw upon a wide range of tools. And so I think we're positioned fairly well, to whatever changes, because we've built a structure that allows us to do that. But we're also positioned well because of our mayor's leadership. Our mayor just yesterday created a task force, a working group at a citywide level with business leaders and labor leaders to make sure that we are planning for and preparing for the recovery. And we're thinking about the recovery from an equity standpoint. What things do we need to do today to ensure that when we recover, all communities recover, all students from all areas of our city have an opportunity in that recovery? And so, it wouldn't be a surprise to you that City Colleges is on that task force, right? Along with the mayor and the business leaders because of what we can deliver, right? And so, Dakota, I don't have a specific silver bullet here, but I think all of those things and ensuring that our faculty are working with our provosts and our presidents to problem solve with the eye on both transfer and job entry, I think are going to be the most important.
Yeah, I mean, as a former Chicagoan, it's absolutely no surprise to hear that, Mayor Lightfoot and other city leaders like you are applying, a real sharp equity focus on the recovery and on the kind of supports that are being provided both now and in the future. I guess I'm wondering from your perspective, whether or not we're getting that same equity focus right when it comes from the kind of support that we're getting from the federal government and from state governments, or if there's more there that you need to be able to get from them to do the job that you need to do effectively.
Well, look, I think when it comes to federal government, I appreciate that community college and higher ed were included in the first round of CARES Act stimulus. I think that is critically important, and that we haven't received the funds yet, right? We're shortly able to get those funds out, but deeply disappointed, in the recent decision by U.S. Secretary DeVos to exclude a segment of our population, from being able to be assisted. And, that's not the kind of federal help, that we need at this moment in time. We need more inclusive mindset, a lot more flexibility. The level of bureaucratic hoops that we now have to jump through as a result of that last minute flip-flop, is in a situation like this when you're trying to execute in real time, it's an impediment, right? And so what we need from the federal government right now is to continue to provide supports without the impediments, right? And without the politics. And so, to the degree that they're able to do that, we'll continue to be grateful for their efforts to support local communities. At the state level, our governor has been, very concerned with the safety and well-being of our communities, and we deeply appreciate that because at the end of the day, while education matters, you've got to have a life, okay, for that person that's pursuing a better life, and so we'll continue to support, his efforts and Mayor Lightfoot's efforts to ensure that our communities are in fact safe.
Well, thank you. Before I let you go, I just wonder if you have any parting advice for your peers in the field, other community college leaders that are trying to navigate, uncertain times.
Boy, I guess draw upon your values. This decision, for instance, by Secretary DeVos, we are going to find a way to make sure that every student gets the same amount of money at each of our colleges in terms of emergency assistance. We're going to do it on a head count basis because we're not favoring a full-time student over a part-time student. And even though the federal government has said you can't spend our resources, on these students that don't have Social Security numbers, we will figure out a way to raise the resources so that every student gets the same amount, And yes, that's difficult. We're going out to do it. It is costly as well, but we're going to be in alignment with our values. And we're not going to have a student receiving assistance and the student next to them not receiving assistance simply because they have a different status, That just sends the wrong message. to our students, and it's counter to the message that we've been sending all along. And so it's in times like this where we got to dig deep and make sure that we're congruent with things that we believe.
Well, Chancellor Salgado, I really appreciate the time you spent with us today. Thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
on, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Dakota. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you.
Our last guest today rounds out the perspectives brought to you on today's show. We've heard from Kathy Longstreet about the conversation she's having with students. We've also heard from a city leader, Chancellor Salgado, about the local community college response. In our final segment, we turn to the state level. Dr. Harrison Keller is the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Texas. I had a chance to ask him about the disruptions COVID-19 is having at both the campus and state level.
I'm Harrison Keller. I'm the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Texas. Of course, for higher education in Texas and across the United States, the COVID-19 crisis has been incredibly disruptive on a scale that we haven't seen in disruptions to campus operations since the wake of the Second World War. So I'm inspired by how quickly campuses have responded within a couple of weeks in Texas. So campuses were able to get almost all their offerings converted to online delivery. They shifted their campus operations to require minimal staff to have to be on campus, and sent the students home. Of course, we've got a few students that weren't able to leave the dorms and needed some emergency housing. So we do have a few thousand students across the state who still need those services from the campuses, but the vast majority of the students now have gone back home. Many of our campuses have also been actively partnering in the public health response, and that's something that I think hasn't gotten enough attention in the stories about higher education institutions. There's not only through the hospitals and health science centers, but also through 3D printing of face shields or re-engineering respirators. Higher ed institutions across the state have been stepping up and are actively engaged in those communities' public health responses. So of course there are tremendous challenges, but as I'm sure we'll talk about today, there's also some opportunities for higher education and for our state.
I'm really curious to dig in a little bit deeper about some of the specific issues that some of the campuses might be facing. I know we've been hearing a lot from campuses and others that are trying to support campuses to figure out ways to share information between everything about enrollment, direct to student supports. What are you hearing as some of the major challenges that campuses are facing directly?
So some of the near-term challenges were converting the courses to online and helping provide some guidance to staff and to students so that folks could shelter at home. So there were those initial disruptions. The major cost pressure, though, on the campuses has been for residential campuses in Texas, they've generally provided prorated reimbursements of room and board to students, and that's been has a substantial impact on their budgets. Those kinds of auxiliary operations can represent between 9 and 15% of some campuses' revenues. So it has a major budget impact on our campuses. And then as we look out over the little bit longer term, I think you're exactly right to hone in on enrollments. The enrollments for the summer are down considerably at almost all institutions. And then even looking ahead to the fall, the enrollments are off. So summer enrollments at many campuses are off more than 20%, some campuses more than 30%. And then looking ahead to fall enrollments, we have campuses where their enrollments are off 40 or 50% for some of the community colleges. Now, all the presidents, we stay in close touch with them. They're all sort of taking these numbers with a grain of salt because nobody really knows exactly what the situation is going to be for the fall. So a lot of folks, I think, are sheltering at home, not really thinking about the fall, just trying to get through day to day right now.
I can certainly appreciate that. And we were just having a recent conversation about how much speculation is going on right now. And I guess as you've been having conversations with campus leaders and maybe providing advice to others, are there any particular metrics or trends that you do advise campuses or potentially other state leaders to be looking at as a way to make more evidence-based decisions? There's just so much uncertainty out there right now, a lot of worry, a lot of speculation. How do we tamp down speculation to make sure we're placing people in a right position to plan for the future?
Sure, absolutely. Well, one of the things that our governors emphasized that I appreciate is that these decisions need to be made by consulting with the doctors and the data. And so where there's tremendous pressure on the campuses and on other operations, and certainly across private businesses across the state, we've got to protect public health. So the health and safety of our students, our staff, or faculty within the institutions, that's got to be paramount. Now, one of the issues that's come up recently that we're trying to provide some additional guidance on is, well, what does conforming with the CDC guidelines look like? And so we're working closely with the governor's task force to hopefully in the next few days provide some more specific actionable information to campuses about what the compliance should look like. There are some campus operations that have to continue that are essential services. There are even some face-to-face components of educational programs. For example, some workforce education programs for essential workers that need to continue, that can't really be put online. So we're working along with the campuses and with the Texas Department of Emergency Management and other taking other input from across the state and in consultation with the federal government, so that we can provide the best guidance to campuses.
And shifting a little bit to some of the kind of revenue structures. I mean, we know campuses around the country right now are figuring out, which kinds of fees, tuitions in some cases will be prorated and reimbursed. But we also know that takes, that those account for a pretty large amount of a campus's revenue, as well as there's certainly a time right now where campuses are incurring new kinds of costs that they did not anticipate. Can you give us a sense of what that looks like in Texas?
Well, some of the short-term costs that they didn't anticipate are software licenses, getting courses online. A lot of campuses have purchased hotspots or laptops for students and have been shipping those out at both our 2-year and our 4-year institutions. Again, the biggest hit has been to not just on the cost side, but on the revenue side. The revenues from room and board, from some of these auxiliary fees, are a pretty considerable part of institutions' budgets, and so those reimbursements of those fees and for room and board, that's taken a substantial bite out of institutions' budgets. Also keep in mind that the revenue streams, there are other revenue streams that they've lost. I was talking to the president of one of our community colleges the other day, the president of Brazosport Community College, which is a smaller, more rural community college. And just in the closures for 2 months has cost them about $100,000 a month just in events. Even a small community college. So you think about what that might mean across higher ed institutions, especially for larger institutions, with the loss of athletics revenues, other major events that they host on their campuses. That's made this unlike what we saw in, for example, coming out of the Great Recession, where state budgets were cut and pulled back, but there were other revenue streams still coming into the campuses.
So that shifts us a little bit towards thinking about how much how far the federal stimulus package is really going to take us. So we have, we have the CARES Act, we have GEAR. What's that looking like from your perspective? Is that going to be enough to not only fill in the gaps of potential revenue loss on the multiple avenues as you've just described, as well as we know a lot of it's being allocated to emergency student aid and student need. I know you've also talked about in future enrollments how FAFSA it might need to be, and FAFSA EFC calculations might need to be reconsidered. So how far does that stimulus package as we currently have it take us?
It was certainly helpful and appreciated, but nowhere near on a scale that you would need to be able to fill in the gaps. So we're both on the emergency aid side and on the direct support for campuses. The federal stimulus dollars have certainly been helpful, but there's major gaps in the budgets right now, let alone looking ahead to what could happen to enrollments on down the road. Now on there. As we're thinking about what might happen, of course, there's a lot of deliberation that's going on right now in Washington about federal stimulus funds. We would certainly be hopeful that there would be funding both additional direct support for higher education, but also support for state budgets to help shore up the state budgets. What has typically happened, of course, when unemployment goes up and state budgets are tough, is that higher education has tended to bear a disproportionate share of those cuts. Now, part of that's been because some policymakers will say, well, higher ed has these other revenue streams, tuition, fundraising, other kinds of revenue streams. Of course, all of those revenue streams now have been cut, and some have dried up completely, at least for the short term. But there's another piece that I think is important to emphasize, and that's that if we think about where higher education sits, we need to not just focus on the costs and the disruption of the campuses, but I don't think it's too early to start talking about what the special role and responsibility of our campuses should be for helping to support and accelerate the recovery. So I know higher education leaders from community and technical colleges, universities, university systems who take this role very seriously and are, I think, would be prepared to come together and say, yes, we've got enormous costs, we've got enormous disruption to our campuses, but part of how we're going to help our state and our nation upskill, reskill, get back on their feet is going to be through post-secondary education.
I mean, it's no surprise that I completely agree with you. I mean, I think higher education institutions, community colleges, state flagships, whatever they may be, private, small privates are really important stewards of their community. And you've already noted a couple examples, the kind of response that they've been able to provide in terms of still providing healthcare, leveraging their physical infrastructure in some cases to be responsive to those in needs of housing, for example, 3D printing of a variety of personal protection equipment. And I appreciate what you're also saying about let's start thinking about what it's going to take in terms of recovery. Right. As you think about, certainly what's coming in terms of that recovery period, are there particular populations that you are most concerned about?
Yeah, so there's three populations that I especially worry about that keeps me up at night. The first one is we have a fairly substantial population of students that already were vulnerable and their financial aid packages might not be sufficient to make sure that all of their basic needs are covered. So we have students with housing insecurity, with food insecurity. Those students now are in an even more vulnerable situation. And so, of course, institutions are stepping up with emergency aid. As the federal dollars start to flow and help support emergency aid, that will be helpful for students. But these students have needs today. And so we are working with the institutions and with our Texas philanthropies to organize some additional emergency aid to help the campuses in supporting those students. The second population I worry about are the students that all of a sudden have suffered severe financial shocks to their and their families' financial situation. You alluded to earlier that the FAFSAs that were filed and the financial aid packages that were awarded don't really recognize the current situation. So there are a lot of folks who suddenly have lost their jobs and are worried about whether the resources are going to be there to enable students to continue to enroll and to re-enroll for this next summer and this next fall. That's part of what we see going on in the around higher ed enrollments right now. And so we're going to have to quickly, on large scale, be able to re-estimate those financial aid packages and reassure students that the resources are going to be there. Then there's the third population that we don't talk about as much, and I think needs to get more attention, especially now. It's even more urgent, and that's the adult learners, especially adult learners that have some college but no credential, folks who've stopped out or dropped out, who are especially going to be vulnerable to unemployment. A lot of these folks have been, for example, employed in the service sector, and suddenly have seen their jobs disappear overnight. Now, of course, in Texas, we have two black swans simultaneously, because not only do we have the COVID-19 crisis, we also have the shock in the price of oil, and that's been enormously disruptive for the energy sector. And so there are a lot of folks that had good jobs working in the energy sector who didn't have a post-secondary credential, that all of a sudden are in a position where they're going to have to reskill and upskill to be able to get back on their feet. And so that's a population that, again, is especially vulnerable, that I think is important for us to focus on right now.
As we think about a lot of those adult learners, the ones with some college experience but have yet to earn their first credential, or those who might just have industry credentials but never entered into a normal or a typical associate's or bachelor's degree pathway, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are connecting that to the state revenue conversation. Mm-hmm. We know that some states have been having, for a while prior to COVID-19, conversations about what it really means to have a kind of a talent-focused state budget. One that combines workforce allocations with higher education allocations. Do you think this is an opportunity for us to really think about how the workforce kind of oriented in preparation, funding streams that are available to us, as well as those in the traditional education space, can come together to help us recover more quickly?
Yeah, I think that's the right kind of focus, is that we need to remember that higher education isn't just a cost center. There's a return on this investment. There's a return on that investment for individuals, for communities, for states, and for our nation. And so if we make strategic investments that will, again, help folks be reassured that the resources are going to be there to help them complete a credential of value, that will help them get a better job, that will help them advance, provide for their families, we're going to be able to get to a much faster recovery. So there's a key role that higher education has got to play in rapid recovery for the state of Texas and for the United States.
And so, going along that, that doesn't seem to be the only opportunity. I think there is. There's always the old quip of never waste a good crisis, which I know seems to be a mantra of a lot of people right now. And in a way, that's a good mantra for us to have. Going back down to the campus level, you had talked earlier about just how, my word, impressed you were or happy or grateful about how fast campuses were able to convert to an online delivery system. What are some of the silver linings? I mean, what are some of the things that innovators have been trying to move, and then has COVID-19 has rapidly accelerated?
Sure. Well, there have been lots of faculty, departments, entire institutions that have said, we don't really have an interest in going online. We don't have really an interest in redesigning our courses that all of a sudden, within a couple of weeks, were forced to totally change the way that they were teaching. So that's been enormously disruptive. Yes, there are a lot of folks who have been scrambling to figure out how they teach in this new format, and it's not all great in that initial conversion. Nevertheless, what we see across institutions is now we've got faculty creative energy that's channeled in this new direction, and at a scale that we never could have dreamed of. And what I hear from lots of folks is there's a lot of sort of basic teaching online kinds of conversations folks are having about how you chunk content and redesign content for effective online delivery. But there are also a lot of creative ideas that are coming out of these conversions, and it's going to change the way these faculty, these departments think about their own teaching. It's going to change the kind of demands that they make on their institutions. A lot of institutions had, I think, lost ground over the last several years as they started to see teaching centers as cost centers, and some campuses pulled back their supports for teaching and learning. Now all of a sudden everybody's in a different kind of position where they're having to support more faculty in teaching online and using digital tools than anyone ever expected. That's going to change higher education. It's going to change the way that we teach. It's going to change the way people learn. So let me say just two more things about that. One is it's also interestingly already disruptive to traditional academic calendars. And I think that can have long-ranging implications. So as folks, for example, aren't sure when they're going to be able to deliver face-to-face labs or workforce education training, the kinds of contingency plans that they're making are for more intensive, say 2 to 4 week sessions where they can be more nimble in delivering instruction that used to be stretched out over a traditional semester. So that's going to be, I think, not just for the short term, but for the long term, that'll be interestingly disruptive. And then the one other point that I'd make that I think has enormous potential, and we haven't really seen bubble up yet, but I think will be coming, is there's an enormous pool of talent out there among our students that most institutions have not started to tap into. So what I would say to a lot of faculty members is they're scrambling and they're thinking about how they're redesigning these courses and changing the delivery around and rethinking their syllabi, rethinking the semester, is don't forget that you've got an army of digital natives who are already enrolled in your course, enrolled in and invested in your institutions. And what we've already seen at some institutions, but not at large scale and could be coming, is students being enlisted to help fuel and support this redesign.
Seems like a time for updating the definition of what a teaching assistant or a graduate assistant is on campuses.
Absolutely. And these undergraduate learning assistants, I mean, already, and that's been one of the secrets in a lot of these redesign courses and highly effective online courses, is a lot of that content has been created by graduate students or by undergraduate students who are helping to support the instruction of these courses.
Mm. And I guess, at least some might hope that the conversion that you're talking about, and certainly once we figure out the best way to make this conversion, the best way to deliver online instruction, that might actually help us reach out to those populations we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's we're gonna need to quickly move past just thinking about how we take what we were doing before and deliver it in this new format. And instead, we're going to be much more effective, much more quickly if we focus on the needs of different end users and the needs of different students, including traditional age students as well as adult learners, who might need different kinds of course designs, different kinds of delivery, different kinds of supports. They're going to have different needs. And so I've long argued that one of the most important things that we can do is we can emphasize empathy for the learners and design more for those students' specific needs.
Well, Dr. Keller, as you look to the next 3 to 6 months, I know, again, none of us have a crystal ball and we're all responding to it week by week, but what do you see as your priorities for the next 3 to 6 months?
So for our agency, our main role in the crisis has been we've been serving as a resource to the institution. So we're in constant contact with both public and private institutional leaders. We try to provide information and guidance where we can. There's some areas where I can provide some additional flexibility as commissioner. Other areas where we've had to work with the governor's office, and the governor's office has been very responsive, very quick to get back to us, help provide some additional flexibility for our institutions. We are already with the institutions talking about what reopening Texas might look like, what the semesters are going to look like going forward. We're trying to, as much as possible, where we provide additional flexibility, to do it in a way that's consistent with the longer term policy direction that we would want to endorse and being guided by the data and guided by the best evidence that we can muster about what's going to be in the interest of students and our institutions, our communities, and our state. So, of course, who knows whether we'll be able to start in person on campuses in the fall, and what kinds of restrictions might need to be in place, what kinds of precautions might need to be in place. I would say this, that even if we're able to start on time with some precautions and some social distancing, that as we say in Texas, you want to keep one foot loose in the stirrup. So the faculty who are designing courses and the administrators who are thinking about the design of their programs need to be prepared in the event that if there were a subsequent outbreak, where they could rapidly convert courses to online delivery, where they'll be able to address students' health needs and make sure they can keep their students, their faculty, and their staff safe.
Well, before we close, is there anything else that you want to make sure you add today?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. Again, one of the things I would emphasize is that there are tremendous costs and disruptions to our higher education institutions in Texas and across the United States now. Higher education leaders, I think, recognize that they have a special responsibility. They have a special role to play in fueling the recovery. And so we need to not just think about higher education as a cost center, but ask how higher education is going to help America reskill, upskill, and get back on our feet.
Well said. And I thank you so much. I know it's a really busy time for you, so I appreciate the time that you're willing to spend with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good day. Hang in there.
Thanks. You too. Stay safe.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. A special thanks today to the Michigan College Access Network, who helped me connect with Kathy. Please take a moment to subscribe and rate the show. And if you have an idea or a comment, you can reach us at luminafoundation.org or reach me on Twitter @DakotaPalicki. Stay healthy and see you next time.